Welcome to the Way Beyond Ordinary Women podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Benefeld. Years ago, I heard the famous quote by Jim Rohn, "We are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with." Today, I've made it my mission to spend time with brilliant, inspiring, and driven women. Join me today as I introduce you to one way beyond ordinary woman. Well, if you ever listen to any experts that talk about entrepreneurship, one of the things that is commonly heard is that an entrepreneur will see a need in the marketplace and they create a solution for that need. They fill the gap. Well, on today's episode, I'm talking with AJ Buckner. She's the co-founder of Minnesota Brands for Good. Her and her partner, Gina Moore, did exactly that. They saw an opportunity or a need in the marketplace around fundraising, particularly student fundraising. And they came up with an amazing alternative that I know you're going to be just as excited about as I am. So let's get started. Let's talk to AJ and hear all about Minnesota Brands for Good. Well, hello, AJ. So great to have you here with me today.
Hi, good morning. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. I got to tell you, when I first learned about Minnesota Brands for Good, I was so excited. Like you, and probably most of our listeners, I had kind of had it with my most recent experience is cookie dough. For years, boxes of cookie dough in my freezer, and nobody needs that. We've got freezer to mouth in 12 minutes with fresh cookies. That's just not a good thing.
Right. Depends on the day.
Yeah. Well, it's not good for my diet, that's for sure. So
yeah, exactly.
I was just really excited to hear that there is a new alternative, and also that you are using Minnesota brands in such a great way and getting exposure for them. So I don't want to get ahead of things. So I would love to have you start off by telling us, what is Minnesota Brands for Good, and give me a little background on how this came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So Minnesota Brands is a fundraising organization, and what we really do is pull together Minnesota small businesses or emerging brands. Some of the brands in our spring catalog, for example, are, really brand new in terms of coming to the marketplace, which is also fun for us to kind of be helping those brands. But what we do is pull together 8 to 10 Minnesota brands in a fundraising catalog that Minnesota student groups across the state of Minnesota of any size. There's no size requirement, so that's pretty unique and cool too to the fundraising market. But they can utilize that catalog to sell the products inside from any of the brands and earn 40% for their student group. So it really follows kind of the simple logic of typical fundraising, but it gives the supporters, mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles, an option of purchasing a piece of apparel or a personal care product or a food product, all from the same fundraising catalog, all benefiting not only their students, but also small Minnesota businesses. So we call it kind of like a win-win-win with a little exclamation point at the end, because it's just, from a Minnesota standpoint and a local business standpoint, just really kind of hits off on students, businesses, and then all of the other good things that these brands are doing in the community as well. So, purchasing from them benefits really our local communities pretty heavily.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that there's a variety. So you're not stuck with just the one thing that the kids happen to be promoting or selling that year. You get a choice of what you want.
We do hear a lot of people that like that same element. And in fact, in the beginning, we had people, when they'd reach out, say, okay, so do I pick one? Like, do I get to just sell hip hop popcorn, or do I have to pick Kind Lips? And it's like, no, you actually get the full assortment. And they're like, oh, wow, okay. So getting people to understand that they get the full assortment and that the catalog contains, for spring, there's all 8 brands. People seem to be really enjoying that element of it.
Yes. And so now you just kicked off the spring campaign, is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
So how does that work? How long does it run? Is there a specific time period that the campaign runs?
There is. So spring just kicked off. So we have groups starting in early March, and then the spring selling window goes through April 12th. So anytime between now and then, groups of any size can sign on and perform and sell against the spring fundraiser. And then we'll come back in August with the fall fundraiser. And that one will be a little bit longer. That one will last from mid-August through November. So just because fall tends to be a heavy fundraising season, that made sense for us to have that window open a little longer. But with spring, given a lot of the groups are school-based, we wanted to make sure that orders were collected and product was dispersed and back to these groups before school ends. So April 12th is sort of the critical deadline for spring in terms of when groups will no longer be able to sell against the spring catalog.
Okay, so, and you maybe mentioned this, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Is it just for schools, or can any organization participate in this?
Any organization can. I would say it's geared towards students, but we have had quite a few youth groups through churches reach out and come on board for spring. Like, they're raising money for a summer mission trip or for travel and those sorts of things. And then we've also actually had, other nonprofits who are raising funds for, their own causes, groups that support specifically like cancers or youth illnesses and things like that. So it absolutely does not have to be student groups. Anybody can take part in one of the fundraisers, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. So let's go back to now. This is a fairly new endeavor for you, and you have a partner. Tell me about you and Gina's background and how this came to be.
Yeah, so Gina and I have been very good friends since 2006. So we went to college together, although we didn't know each other at Winona State. And then both of us actually got our careers started at J.R. Watkins Naturals down in Winona, Minnesota. And both of us were on the product and brand team down there for about 2.5 years in total before we actually ended up both relocating to the Twin Cities in the summer, roughly the summer of 2009, right around the same time. And we kind of went our separate ways professionally, but stayed very good friends in that time. She went on to work for some fairly small but very entrepreneurial companies locally, and I worked for Dairy Queen corporate for a couple of years, and then actually went on to work at Pearson's Candy in St. Paul, which is where I still currently work full time, and Gina's focused solely on running this business. So we always felt like, even going back 15 years, we always said, like, by a certain age limit, okay, by the time granted, we were like 22 when we had this idea, right? We're like, by the time we're 30, we're going to own a business. And then, our 30s came and went, and we had no business. And then it was like, okay, well, maybe by the time we're 40, we'll start our own business. And I think what really propelled us is I was actually, not to get overly personal, but I was going through divorce very early last year. And I actually ended up a few nights a week staying at her place. And I think it just honestly gave us just enough extra oomph, like the time spent together and just sort of like reflecting on how my life was personally changing. We just kind of felt like, why not now? Like we keep saying when we're 30, when we're 35, okay, then how about when we're 40? It just felt to us like there was never really going to be this like perfect moment. And if we didn't try to just seize the opportunity, we would potentially never do it. And we knew going into whatever we did, we loved the idea of helping emerging small local businesses. I think we were just both very inspired by the amount of very cool brands and people that are in the community here that are doing such great things.
Yeah, they
And
really
it was
are.
like, yeah, it really is. Like, if you shop even just some of the really cool local stores, it's like they're just filled with so many interesting, unique products and brands. And we just loved that, we didn't have to go far to feel like we could make an impact on these small businesses that were trying to do so much for the community and for the state of Minnesota. And kind of just out of that inspiration came, how do we not only help them in terms of like a service we could offer, but how do we actually like physically help them grow? Which is kind of when we started exploring the sales channel and realizing, fundraising is so critical to families and kids these days. Everybody does it. Not everybody loves to do it. It could certainly probably use a little bit of new energy. And like the two just really kind of came together, and Minnesota Brands for Good was born. We didn't go into it thinking fundraising company. We just, it really started with what can we do for Minnesota small businesses? And then, both Gina and I are parents. And so the kid and student fundraising angle just sort of came right after. It was like, what about fundraising?
Yeah, I'm guessing that, during that time that you were staying with her, there was probably a few glasses of wine involved in the conversations.
Yeah, always.
It's just the perfect environment for creativity. And I love that, what you said about there never being a perfect time. It's kind of like, when you decide when you should have kids. It's like, oh, well, let's wait until this.
I was absolutely just going to say that,
Yeah.
right? It's like exactly how you feel about kids. Like, is there really ever a perfect time? It's a life disruptor, So there never really is a perfect time. And we just totally felt like maybe it's now or never, and maybe we just need to go for it. So obviously we're thrilled we did. And there's so much ahead. We're just really getting started. So
yeah, so I love
really, really.
I want to talk about what's next too, because I'm a visionary, and my mind is just rolling with like, oh my God, the things that you could do with this. So you probably have ideas for the short term and the long term, but share with us kind of what your thought process is for what this could be.
Yeah, we definitely have some closer in goals. And, I think the thing that can be challenging, like when you're just starting something too, is feeling like there's so many things that are close in that it feels really hard to think about 5 years from now. But we try to constantly talk about that. Like, what do we want to be like, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? We certainly see this evolving. Some of the things just closer in, we would love to have an e-commerce solution and portion of our business so that Uncle Joe in Florida can purchase something to support his niece's fundraising program, and it would ship directly to him there. Right now, we're limited to only selling from the catalog. So we see that as a really critical next step. We see the catalog evolving in terms of its assortment and its brands and its reach. Like, for example, in the spring catalog, these awesome 8 brands come from really the Twin Cities metro area. And we envision and would love the catalog to one day, have a mix of brands that are as north as Ely and as south as Winona and beyond. So I think diversifying that portion and just some of the brands that we work with is a goal for us and something we really look forward to. And then, thinking even just further out, we are constantly talking about just other ways that we could be doing good in the community. And, we've even thought of wild things that are further out, like a shelter for families and kids, especially just in the winter and cold, that we've raised the money to do something like that through means of our partners and relationships and the selling that we've done. And
Yes.
just how far can we take the whole for good idea in the state of Minnesota?
I love that. And there's so many brands that are giving within the state of Minnesota, and those, just the fact that they are participating in Minnesota Brands for Good just shows, their commitment to the communities. So there's certainly lots of opportunity there. I love it.
Yeah. One of the other things, to your point, the thing that's kind of got our wheels turning here, and, like you said, it's so new that there'll definitely be vision that has to happen behind what we are further down the road. But I think one of the things that's really inspired us is the brands that we're working with, because they all care obviously very deeply about the community and about the state of Minnesota, and growing their business here. And the extra layer to that that's been really fun to see and learn about is what some of those brands are doing directly to certain organizations or causes that they are passionate about. Like, for example, Janita's Jar is a cookie that's in the spring catalog, and they're delicious. They've got cute little packaging. They're fantastic cookies, and her whole business is based on empowering women and supporting domestic violence education and things like that. So she gives a portion of her proceeds every year to those causes. So when we talk about the whole win for the brands, the win for the students, and then really the win for the additional community, it's really those things that have inspired us, So not only is your purchase helping your student, helping the business, and then it's helping whatever cause that business also has. And many of them in our spring catalog have that sort of extra philanthropic layer or donation or proceeds giveaways that they're doing on an annual basis to a bunch of causes around the state of Minnesota, which is really inspiring, I think.
Yeah, it is. And so you're, not only are you fundraising, but you're also expanding that reach. And I think that makes people feel good. I feel a lot better about that than buying wrapping paper from some random company in, God knows where they come from,
Right.
But I know where my money is going. So that's really, It's personal and it stays in the community. So that's a beautiful thing. So given your backgrounds, we're, talking about this as a business, given your backgrounds in marketing and branding, how are you helping these companies too? I would have to imagine that, just being in your catalog is certainly beneficial, but are there other things that they can learn from you? Do you have plans or ideas for assisting these small brands in growing?
We've started to talk a lot about that. We haven't, I wouldn't say we've executed anything specific yet in terms of sort of other services, but we certainly feel like, given Gina's background and having worked in very small organizations, she really has a strong handle on a ton of different sort of business objectives, and her strengths are really on the operational side. And so she can really be a tool that way. And I have probably a bit more specific product and brand marketing experience. So we do certainly feel like there are additional things that we could do to help. And certainly, anybody who asks that is a partner that needs help, it's certainly something we're willing to do. And this springtime, what we're kind of focused on too is, we're taking pictures and doing things for social media, and we of course share all of those. And so for some of the brands, they're still doing all of that on their own. And so even just some of the tools that we can give them with some of the content maybe that we've created is something that they can eventually leverage. We've done some PR things behind kicking off spring, and then absolutely like giving them the ability to utilize, content that's been created either by us or by the WCCO or our podcast today, just anything that we are doing on their behalf that they can utilize, moving forward to help their brands as well.
Yeah. And like with any small business, and when you're starting up, it's hard you need to balance, you need to stay focused on the mission so you don't lose sight. I have a tendency to being a visionary. I'm like, oh, the ideas flow like, like a chocolate fountain. And I'm like, stop the madness. I need to stay focused. Yes.
I know. It is really hard though, especially I think when you're excited about something and we both feel so passionate about what we're doing that, we'll have like work sessions. We always go into those with like our hit list, right? Like these are the 5 things we need to get done while we're together tonight. And within like inevitably 20 minutes, one of us is like, what about if like 4 years from now we do
of
this?
course.
And it's like, okay, no, back to focusing. Okay.
We'll put that on the list.
It's hard. Yeah, it is hard.
Well, that is a great segue because I want to talk about some of the challenges that you have faced and are facing anytime you're starting a new venture. There's going to be challenges, and you've got a partner, which I know you guys are terrific friends, but it does add another layer. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing so far?
I would say there's always the usual suspects, right? She's the only one that's working on it full time. Just from a personal perspective, I've struggled with that because I do feel so strongly about it and because I want to be a good partner. It's hard when you're juggling, full-time work and trying to build this in your evenings, nights, and weekends life. But I would say aside from sort of the typical stuff, I think one of the things that's been the biggest challenge for us is just making sure that we are telling sort of our story and our concept very simply so that anyone from, the head of a PTO at a school all the way up to, the co-founder of a brand that we may work with very easily, very quickly, very simply can understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think because it's a new concept and a new idea, that challenge to us to make sure that we can give like just a 60-second elevator pitch to anybody who's like, oh yeah, I heard something about Minnesota Brands for Good, but what exactly do you do? To make sure that like we can literally tell somebody in 60 seconds. And I think over time that will get easier and less of a challenge. But, we want it to be so clear, and to us it is very clear, and to those of us who are working on it and are close to it. But I think making sure that the masses completely get what we're doing and understand our mission has been one of our bigger challenges.
Well, yes, I can certainly see where that could be challenging. It is anytime you have a new company that you want to get the message out and you want to make sure it's consistent.
Yeah.
So as you grew this, there's a lot of ways to start a business. Are you bootstrapping this? Did you have funding? How have you gone about it so far in growing the business?
Yeah, bootstraps is a great reference. We self-funded the business thus far, which has been great. I think, whether it's a strong suit or it ends up actually being a downfall at some point, because Gina and I have diverse backgrounds across very small to sort of mid-sized companies. We have a ton of personal experience across so many different kind of organizational duties that much of it we've been able to do ourselves, which is a blessing in disguise probably, because it's probably also partly why sometimes we've gone crazy over the last year, but it has also allowed us to get the business up and running and really going, having not needed any additional funding. So that's something that, at this point, we're proud to have gotten this far, sort of being able to tackle much of it on our own. And obviously, we see our team size growing.
What does your team look like now? Is it just the two of you?
Yeah, so it's the two of us, and then we do have an agency that helps us with web work. That is something that we just are not willing to take on our own. And then we also have an external group of sales reps that help us manage and get groups on board. So they have reps across the state of Minnesota who have a lot of relationships with student groups and schools already. And they're kind of our boots on the ground in terms of making sure that we can service and give great customer service to a student group that's all the way up in, International Falls versus just the ones that are down in the Twin Cities, because they span the state. And then internally, we have a content writer who does help for us, or who does some work for us, and a account manager that works directly for Minnesota Brands for Good, who really helps in the South Metro and some of the Twin Cities based accounts.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of one of my questions too about the sales reps, because certainly that would be a huge job to try and get the word out. So yeah, brilliant that you have found the network to be able to do that for you.
Yeah, I feel like that piece of it was critical, at least, in the beginning for sure. And just wanting groups to feel like they have the resources and an account person to help manage and support them through their campaign. I think that piece of it is critical for us.
Yeah, definitely. So as we wrap up here, I would love to hear from you. When I'm talking to women business owners, I want to know what advice you would have that you would give to any woman that was starting a business today.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think, your support staff or support system and your support network is obviously hypercritical. And I think most of us as women tend to support one another heavily that way. And so I think just kind of find your tribe or your crew and make sure that you absorb all the knowledge and support that they can give. But I think as I sort of reflected myself too, on being thankful that I took the risk I did in partnering with Gina at the time we decided to really get this off the ground and running. I think one of my biggest pieces of advice is honestly just to listen to your gut instinct and to understand the difference between the sort of unsettledness that you can feel when it's just risk-based versus it not being necessarily the right thing. And I think sometimes because risk and the unknown can make us feel like then that must mean it's not the right thing. I think sometimes listening to your intuition in a way where it's like, risk is always going to feel uncomfortable, I think, to many people, probably the majority of people. And I think listen to your intuition and understand the difference between, a risk that could have great reward and, a risk that would cause you to make a decision you shouldn't be making. And I think sometimes those are hard to decipher when you're starting out. We've talked to people, all along the way that say over and over again that they didn't do something for so long because something just didn't feel right. And I think when you really talk that out, it's like, it's not that it didn't feel right. It was just that it was a risk. So I think making sure that you find that balance? And is the risk the reward and it's just the unknown that you're feeling? Or is it truly that you've got to maybe go back to the drawing board and tweak your concept or your business before you take it to the next level? I think just sort of listening to yourself that way and making, educated decisions about that. Because I just know that I definitely felt that way. And now looking back, there isn't anybody really that we speak to that doesn't say, wow, what a cool concept. I totally get what you guys are trying to do. It's great for the brand. It's great for the students. But like a year ago, there was absolutely times where I'd be sitting at home and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, is this even a good idea? Is it the right idea? And I think now looking back, those feelings for me were just coming from the fact that it was a risk, right?
Oh, yeah. It's fear, fear of the unknown, fear of change. You're putting yourself out there. You have a financial stake in the game. There's a lot of fear involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you made the right choice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think just listen to yourself and understand, like, is it the fear of the things that you can overcome? Or is it truly that your idea just maybe needs some refining before you take it to the next level? And I think, like we kind of said at the beginning of our chat together, just, is there ever really the perfect time? Like, it's for sure like having kids, right? They're the most amazing reward ever, but there's never the perfect time.
Well, and sometimes too, we get stuck in this whole idea that things have to be perfect before we can even start. And if you waited for the perfect time, if you waited until your plan was crystal clear, no one would ever get off the ground. Sometimes it's okay to do B+ work or A- work.
Yeah.
You always have to do A+ work. It's still going to be really good.
Absolutely.
But you got to get going. Yeah.
Totally true.
Great advice. So, last question before we wrap up and I get some more information that I can share with our listeners is I love, because this is Way Beyond Ordinary Women, I love to recognize women of influence. So I'd like to hear from you. Who have been the most influential women in your life?
I think from a career perspective, I've certainly had some amazing women in and out of my life, including and really starting with Gina, who's our co-founder at Minnesota Brands for Good. We met when we were really young. We were both super hungry and driven from a career perspective. And she has absolutely played a really critical role in my life that way. And I would say, from a personal perspective, I come from a family of just like crazy, crazy strong women. Like, I don't even feel like anything I do holds a candle to like how amazing my mom and my grandma, and I was lucky enough to live quite a ways into adulthood having my great grandma still around.
Wow.
And so we actually had 5 generations for, my daughter was, I think she was 5 when my great grandma passed.
So not only were they really strong, but they got good genes too.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my great grandma lived to be 101.
Wow.
And she was just like a pioneer of her time too. Like, she went to college when women didn't traditionally do it, and then her husband died, and so she ran like a farm her whole life on her own, starting at like age 35. That just has been sort of passed down, and like I said, I don't even feel like anything I do like holds a candle to my mom and my grandma. They're the most amazing, for sure, the most influential women in my life. Like, there isn't anything the two of them can't do. And so I just feel super blessed to have them still in my life. My grandma's will be 81 this April. And her health is still great. And we spend tons of time together. And her and my daughter, who's now 13, are like two little peas in a pod. So I'm just so thankful to have sort of that strong, immediate network of women that they've definitely been the ones who have carried me sort of, I would say, through everything that I've probably been through personally and professionally.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I'm very lucky to have them.
Yes, you are. So I'm going to have some of this information in the show notes, but share with us now, how can listeners learn more, get their hands on that catalog, find out more about Minnesota Brands for Good?
Best tool would be to start on our website, which is mnbrandsforgood.com. We do have the spring catalog has a digital copy that's on the site as well. So if they're interested in seeing sort of the spread of the brands inside and the offering inside, that'd be a great place to start. And then there's also a contact us form on the site. If there are groups that are interested and in need of spring fundraising, certainly send us a quick note and we will get some immediate follow-up and get the resources and tools in your hands to get that done. And then also if there's brand owners, that same contact us form can be used for brands who are interested in chatting further about maybe being featured in, fall of 2019 catalog or even maybe spring of 2020.
Perfect. Well, and I know that a lot of our listeners are Minnesota brands, so they will certainly find that interesting. And those listeners who have kids and are involved in all of these different types of organizations now have an alternative.
Yeah. And we'd love to hear from both sides.
All right.
We're just so excited about all the different people we hear from daily now. So we'd love to hear from them.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us today, AJ. It has been so great. I'm so excited for you and Gina and the whole Minnesota Brands for Good. I think it's going to be a remarkable business, much needed. And I really commend you for identifying this need in the market and creating the solution. Way to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks again for having me.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. It'll help to get the word out and share these wonderful Way Beyond Ordinary stories with the world. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss an episode. You don't want to miss another Way Beyond Ordinary story. Until next time, make it a Way Beyond Ordinary day.